This is every painful death and trap in the Saw franchise explained in 1 hour and 27 minutes.
Mitch. Mitch was selling faulty motorcycle brakes that directly led to a man's death. When John Kramer himself got hold of him during the barn sequence, he made sure the punishment fit the crime perfectly. The barn setup was elaborate as hell, with Mitch suspended by his feet above this massive rotating spiral blade that was literally powered by the motorcycle engine from the faulty bike Mitch sold. The trap gave him one shot at survival. Grab a key from a funnel to stop the death machine before time ran out. But it wasn't that easy, and things would go terribly wrong. After Anna managed to stop the spiral blade rotating, Mitch decided to do absolutely nothing. Instead of completing the task while the wheel was stopped, he just didn't do anything, and this quickly went bad for him. The metal bar Anna used to stop the spiral blade spinning snapped, and Mitch just couldn't move fast enough. Mitch got diced up by the blades, leaving us with one of the most painful-looking deaths. If you thought that was bad, just remember they get so much more painful from here, like the next one. Detective Fitch. Detective Fitch wasn't just an ordinary cop. He had a long history of police brutality and lying under oath that directly led to numerous innocent people's deaths. So when a Jigsaw copycat appeared, who was specifically targeting corrupt police officers, Fitch was the perfect opening victim. Fitch woke up with a mechanical device around his head and wires tied around his fingers while sitting in a bathtub. He had to bite down on the mechanical device around his head, which would pull the wires on his fingers and rip them off. He needed to do all that before the water level rises too much and causes him to be electrocuted. And surprisingly, he did. For a moment, Fitch bit down on the device and suffered unbearable pain for moments before he stopped, and then started again. This short break he took would ultimately lead to his death as the water level continued to rise and he wasted too much time. While he died quite quickly, the build-up to it was slow and agonizing, especially as he had his fingers half ripped off before he died. But if you think that was painful, this next victim had to endure insane pain while also having another challenge. Dena. Dena was a journalist who used her platform and her voice to actively harm people. So naturally, Jigsaw decided to target exactly that weapon she'd been using. This trap was part of Saw 3D's sequence of public, unwinnable games, which added this whole extra layer of humiliation to the torture. The mechanics were absolutely diabolical. Dena was tied up with a fishhook and string going down her throat, and that string was attached to a key buried inside her stomach. Bobby Dagan, who was being tested for his own lies about surviving a Jigsaw trap, had to pull that key out through her throat to save her. But here's the catch that makes this trap so insidious. If Dena made a sound during this process, spikes would begin to impale her throat and kill her. Not only does she have to endure insane pain, but she has to be quiet. The trap was testing both Dena's endurance and Bobby's resolve, but it was really designed to be a test of the impossible. Despite Bobby's desperate efforts to save her, Dena couldn't maintain her silence. He managed to rip the hook out of her, but she began screaming in pain and was slowly impaled by the spikes before Bobby could save her. Speaking of nightmare territory, the next death combines psychological torture with one of the most claustrophobic and impossible choices ever conceived. Captain Garza. Captain Angie Garza was a police superior who was implicated in the same systemic corruption that the Jigsaw copycat was trying to expose. She had history with Zeke Banks, but she was part of the problem he was trying to solve. The copycat designed this trap to be both torturous and symbolic, and obviously extremely painful. She was strapped down, completely unable to move as boiling hot wax began pouring directly onto her face. The wax was threatening to both suffocate and burn her simultaneously, creating this dual torture that attacked her in multiple ways at once. But here's where the trap gets truly diabolical. She was given an option to escape. All she had to do was sever her own spinal cord.
The only way to stop yourself from being suffocated is to sever your spinal cord,
which would leave her permanently paralyzed. Garza couldn't bring herself to do it. She died as the wax solidified around her face, simultaneously suffocating and burning her while she was fully conscious. Zeke discovered her body too late and was absolutely devastated by her loss, which added another layer of emotional trauma to an already brutal scene. Fans rank this highly because of the sheer impossibility of the choice and the combination of burning, suffocation, and complete helplessness. Even seasoned Saw fans were shocked by the brutality of this trap, and the claustrophobic setting made it even more disturbing to watch. And if you think impossible choices are bad, the next one got stuck with a painful and impossible task for a very dark reason. Seth Baxter. Seth was a murderer who had escaped justice through the legal system. So Detective Mark Hoffman decided to take matters into his own hands, with some personal revenge. The twist here is that this wasn't actually a real Jigsaw test. Hoffman was using Jigsaw's methods to cover his own tracks while eliminating someone he felt deserved to die. The setup was simple, but terrifying. Seth was shackled to a table with this massive pendulum blade swinging back and forth above him, getting lower with each swing. The blade was huge, sharp, and perfectly designed to create maximum dread as it slowly descended toward his body. The rules seem straightforward enough. Crush your hands in these metal devices to stop the blade from lowering. Seth actually followed the rules perfectly. He crushed his hands completely, enduring that agony because he thought it would save his life. But here's what makes this trap so much more horrific. Hoffman had rigged it from the beginning. The blade kept lowering no matter what Seth did. It sliced into his abdomen and began bisecting him in this slow, agonizing manner while he was fully conscious and realizing that his compliance had been meaningless. Hoffman watched the entire thing through a peephole, making sure Seth suffered as much as possible. This scene established Hoffman's ruthlessness and set up his rivalry with other characters, showing that he was willing to pervert Jigsaw's philosophy for his own revenge. But if following the rules and still dying is horrific, wait until you hear about this historical torture device that slowly roasted someone alive. Joyce Dan was the wife of Bobby Dagan, whose lies about surviving a jigsaw trap had made him famous and wealthy. Bobby had been going through his own series of tests, trying to save his friends to atone for his lies about being a jigsaw survivor. Joyce represented the ultimate stakes. If he failed, the person he loved most would pay the price. She was locked inside this metal bowl, while Bobby was separated from her by an electric fence, forced to watch helplessly as the trap activated. Flames ignited beneath the bowl, and Joyce was slowly roasted alive inside this metal chamber. The ancient Greeks designed the brazen bowl specifically to maximize suffering. The metal would heat up gradually, cooking the victim from the outside in, while amplifying their screams. The emotional impact on Bobby was devastating, as he realized that his lies and his failures had directly led to his wife's torture and death. He had to watch the person he loved most die horribly because of his own actions, which added this psychological torment on top of the physical horror. But even being slowly burned alive can't compare to what this con artist had to endure while fully conscious and aware. Matteo was a con artist who had made the mistake of scamming John Kramer himself during the events of Saw X. Kramer designed this trap to force Matteo to atone for his deception by enduring the kind of extreme pain that matched the emotional damage he'd caused. The setting was this makeshift surgical room that heightened the horror with its medical authenticity. John Kramer and Amanda Young were both present, personally overseeing the test and adding gravity to every moment. Matteo was instructed to perform brain surgery on himself. While fully conscious, he had to remove a piece of his own brain tissue with his bare hands, while completely awake and aware of what he was doing. The psychological horror of self-mutilation, combined with the physical agony of literally digging into his own skull, created this perfect storm of suffering. When Matteo couldn't complete the task in time, a heated mask snapped shut on his face, melting his flesh right off his skull. The slow buildup of the brain surgery, followed by the sudden facial burning, made the whole experience even more traumatic. But this death was nowhere near as bad as the next one. Jill was John Kramer's ex-wife, and her death carried enormous weight for longtime fans, because she was the first person to actually die from the franchise's most iconic device, the reverse bear trap. The trap had appeared in multiple films and become the series' signature torture device, but viewers had never seen it actually kill someone until this moment. Jill's death was part of Detective Hoffman's personal vendetta against her. She had been trying to carry out John's final wishes, but Hoffman saw her as a threat to his own plans and power. The trap itself is designed to rip open the wearer's jaw in the most gruesome way possible. When that timer hit 0, the device snapped open with tremendous force, graphically tearing her face apart and splitting her head open. The mechanism is spring-loaded to create maximum damage in minimum time. But the violence is so extreme that even that brief moment feels endless.
Hoffman watched with satisfaction as Jill died in agony, finally eliminating someone he saw as an obstacle to his own twisted version of Jigsaw's work.
But even facial destruction can't compare to the medical realism and sheer agony of what this other con artist had to do to herself. Valentina was another con artist who had wronged John Kramer during the events of Saw X, and he made sure her punishment reflected the way she had bled people dry financially. The trap was designed to force her to literally bleed herself dry, sacrificing a part of herself to atone for her crimes. Kramer and Amanda were both present, overseeing the test, in this grim industrial room that made everything feel more authentic and more horrifying.
Valentina's crime was personal to Kramer, which made the punishment feel targeted and specific, rather than random.
If you refuse, you'll remain in this room.
The setup was both medically plausible and viscerally horrifying, combining real medical procedures with the franchise's signature brutality.
The trap required Valentina to saw off her own leg and then extract bone marrow through a tube to fill up a container. The medical detail was incredible. This wasn't some fantasy torture device, but something that felt like it could actually work. She had to amputate her own leg first, enduring that agony, while knowing that that was just the beginning of her ordeal. Valentina actually managed to complete the amputation, showing incredible determination and pain tolerance. But then came the bone marrow extraction, which required her to drill into her own bone and extract the marrow while she was already weakened from blood loss and trauma. She couldn't complete the marrow extraction in time, and a mechanical blade decapitated her while she was still conscious from the leg amputation. And if self-amputation sounds terrible, wait until you see what happened to this detective who got too close to the truth and paid the ultimate price. Detective Addison Corde was a recurring character who had a personal connection to the Jigsaw investigation and to her colleagues, which added serious emotional weight to her death. She was targeted specifically for her inability to let go of cases. Her obsession with solving mysteries and uncovering the truth had become her defining characteristic. So naturally, that's exactly what Jigsaw used against her. The Angel Trap is one of the most elaborate and symbolic devices in the entire franchise, designed by Amanda Young as part of her own twisted test of loyalty to Jigsaw's philosophy. The setting was this stark abandoned room that heightened the sense of doom and isolation, making Kerry's death feel even more hopeless and inevitable. Kerry had to retrieve a key from a jar of acid to unlock the harness around her chest.
All you have to do is reach in and take it.
The acid burned her hand as she reached in, but she pushed through the pain because she thought following the rules would save her life. But here's the truly horrific part. Amanda had designed the trap to be unwinnable from the beginning. No matter what Kerry did, no matter how much pain she endured, she was always going to die. When the harness activated, it ripped Kerry's ribcage open like angel wings while she was still alive and conscious. The mechanism literally spread her ribs apart and exposed her internal organs, creating this grotesque angel imagery that gave the trap its name. Amanda watched the entire thing, ensuring that the trap was fatal and that Kerry's suffering was complete. Kerry's death was slow and excruciating, with her screams echoing through the building as she realized that all her compliance and all her pain had been meaningless. The combination of physical agony and emotional impact makes this death particularly devastating, especially since fans had grown attached to Kerry as a character. But even having your ribs ripped open can't compare to the slow, inevitable psychological and physical torture of this FBI agent who made one wrong choice. FBI agent Peter Strahm was one of the smartest characters in the franchise, and his investigation had brought him dangerously close to exposing Detective Hoffman's true role in the Jigsaw murders. This trap was a direct confrontation between two of the series' most intelligent characters, making it as much a battle of wits as it was a torture device. Strahm's investigation skills and his ability to see through deception had made him a serious threat to Hoffman's plans. The trap was designed as a test of Strahm's ability to think outside the box and to trust his instincts, but it was also rigged to eliminate him as a threat to Hoffman's operations. The setting was deliberately claustrophobic, a small, reinforced room with a glass box in the center. When Strahm was locked inside, he was faced with a choice: get in the glass box or stay in the room as the walls began closing in.
His investigative instincts told him that the box was the trap, so he refused to get inside and instead tried to escape the room. But that was exactly the wrong choice. The walls kept moving inward, slowly and inevitably crushing him while he was fully conscious and aware of what was happening. Every bone in his body was broken gradually as the space got smaller and smaller, with no way to speed up the process or escape the inevitable. Hoffman watched from safety, having set the trap specifically to eliminate his rival. Strahm's death was agonizingly slow, with every moment of pain drawn out as he realized he had made the wrong choice and that there was no way to reverse it. And that brings us to the death that fans almost universally agree is the most excruciating and memorable in the entire Saw franchise. Timothy Young was the drunk driver who killed Jeff Denlin's son in a car accident, making this trap personal for everyone involved. The rack is widely regarded as the most painful trap in the Saw franchise, and Timothy's death represents everything that makes these films so mentally devastating. Jeff was given the ultimate test of his capacity for mercy and forgiveness. He could save Timothy's life, but only if he could let go of his need for revenge and his hatred for the man who destroyed his family. The trap was designed specifically to test whether Jeff could move past his grief and anger to show compassion for his son's killer. The setting was a random, grim, industrial warehouse that heightened the sense of dread and made everything feel more serious and more final. Timothy was strapped into a device that would slowly twist his limbs and head, breaking them one by one in a predetermined sequence designed to maximize both pain and psychological terror. When the trap activated, it began systematically destroying Timothy's body, piece by piece. First, his arms were rotated until the bones snapped, then his legs, then finally his neck. Each rotation was slow and deliberate, prolonging Timothy's suffering while Jeff struggled with his decision about whether to intervene.
Addison Corde. Corde was introduced as a young woman with a troubled background who became one of Jigsaw's victims in the infamous nerve gas house. This death involves a simple glass box that becomes an inescapable nightmare when you realize what happens to your arms. In her frantic search for the antidote that would save her life, Addison discovers this glass box with the cure inside. The only way to retrieve it is to insert her arms through 2 slots that are lined with inward-facing razor blades. At first glance, it seems doable. You put your arms in, grab the antidote, and pull them back out. But that's where Jigsaw's twisted genius comes into play. Once both arms are inserted through those slots, withdrawal becomes nearly impossible without severe laceration. The razor blades are designed to cut deeper the more you try to pull back. Addison becomes completely trapped, her arms locked in place by the very mechanism she thought would save her. She bleeds profusely as the realization hits. There's no way out without destroying herself. Her only hope lies in self-mutilation and sheer willpower, but even that's not enough. The blood loss is severe and constant. She's forced to watch herself slowly dying, while the thing that could save her remains just inches away from her fingertips. Addison ultimately succumbs to blood loss in a slow, helpless death. But this is only the beginning, and the deaths get so much worse from here. Eric Matthews. Matthews was a detective whose nightmare began when he failed to save his son in the previous Saw game, but his real suffering was just getting started. This cop thought he'd seen the worst of Jigsaw's games, but months of psychological torture was just the beginning. After failing to navigate the first trap successfully, Eric becomes a recurring victim whose endurance gets tested to its absolute limit. Following his failure to save his son in Saw 2, Eric finds himself broken after months of psychological and physical torment. The isolation and the knowledge that his son suffered because of his mistakes builds into a psychological breaking point. In his desperation to escape this nightmare, Eric attempts to break his own foot to slip out of his restraints. But even this extreme measure doesn't save him. Eric eventually faces a final brutal confrontation with Amanda Young, who bludgeons him to death with an ice block. The violence is up close and personal, made even more horrific by the psychological state Eric is in when it happens. His death stands out because it's not just about the final moment of violence. It's about the extended psychological breakdown that precedes it. But unfortunately, the next one is so much worse. Gus Collard. Collard was a quiet participant trapped in the nerve gas house who let his curiosity and panic get the better of him in the worst possible way. All he did was look through a peephole, but what happened would make you never want to look through anything again. Early in the nerve gas house ordeal, group tensions are running very high as all the victims desperately try to find a way out. Everyone's scared, and the nerve gas is slowly killing all of them. Gus, being naturally impatient and increasingly panicked by their situation, becomes fixated on a locked door that might offer escape. The group is trying different approaches, but nothing's working. The clock is ticking, people are getting sicker, and Gus decides he needs to take matters into his own hands.
Yeah, fuck this. That's a good idea.
No.
He approaches the locked door and decides to look through the peephole to see what's on the other side. What Gus doesn't realize is that a revolver has been rigged to fire when the door handle is turned from the outside, but the mechanism is also triggered by pressure on the peephole itself. As soon as Gus puts his eye to that small opening, the gun fires point blank into his head. The death is shockingly brutal. One moment Gus is trying to help the group escape, the next moment he's dead on the floor. What makes this death particularly effective is the anticipation and confusion among the group. They're all watching, hoping he'll see something useful, and instead they witness an instant execution. But it's not as bad as Dena's. Dena was at the center of one of Jigsaw's most visually memorable and public traps, designed specifically to punish emotional betrayal and manipulation. Dena finds herself placed above a spinning circular saw in what appears to be a staged public demonstration. She's positioned between two men who both have romantic ties to her, Brad and Ryan. The setup seems designed to force these men to compete for her life, to prove their love through sacrifice. But as the trap unfolds, both Brad and Ryan begin to realize the extent of Dena's manipulation. They discover that she's been playing them both, using their emotions against them, and creating the toxic situation that led them all to this point. The trap isn't just about saving her, it's about confronting the truth of what she's done. The platform holding Dena begins to lower towards the spinning saw below. In most Jigsaw traps, this would be where the men do something dumb, where love conquers the game. But instead, as Brad and Ryan fully grasp her betrayals, they make a different choice. Rather than fighting each other to save her, they work together to sacrifice her. The platform tilts completely, dropping Dena directly into the circular saw below. She's sliced in half in front of the watching crowd. The death is made especially horrific by its theatricality. This isn't happening in some hidden basement, but in front of witnesses. The betrayal by her lovers, combined with the public nature of her demise, creates a death that's both physically brutal and emotionally devastating. Art Blank was a defense lawyer with mysterious connections to Jigsaw who found himself in an impossible situation where his professional skills meant nothing. Art finds himself forced into a room with another victim whose eyes have been sewn shut. The two men are essentially trapped in a sensory deprivation experiment where neither can use their primary sense. Art cannot speak and the other man cannot see. This creates an immediate communication breakdown that turns deadly. Art's mouth has been forcibly sewn shut, making it impossible for him to explain the situation, negotiate, or use any of the verbal skills that define his profession. Meanwhile, his fellow victim is stumbling around in complete darkness, unable to understand what's happening or who's in the room with him. The trap becomes psychologically excruciating because Art knows he could potentially resolve the situation if he could just communicate. He understands the game, he might even have information that could save them both, but he's been robbed of the ability to share that knowledge. Unable to speak or negotiate with the other victim, panic and confusion take over. Both men's survival instincts kick in, but without communication, they turn against each other. The room becomes a scene of blind violence and muffled desperation. In the chaotic confrontation that follows, Art is ultimately shot and killed. His death represents the complete failure of communication and the breakdown of civilized problem solving. But this isn't anywhere near as bad as the next one. Bobby Dagan. Dagan was a fraud who gained fame and fortune by falsely claiming to be a Jigsaw survivor, building an entire career on a lie. Bobby had written books, given speeches, and become a minor celebrity by claiming he survived one of Jigsaw's traps. He described in detail how he escaped and how the experience changed his life, but it was all completely fake. When Jigsaw discovers Bobby's deception, he designs a series of tests specifically meant to expose the lie. Bobby is captured and placed in what's called the hoisting trap, a device that will test whether he actually has the strength and determination he claimed to possess. The trap requires Bobby to drive hooks through the muscles of his chest and then hoist himself upward to save his wife. The agony of having hooks pierce and rip through his pectoral muscles is absolutely overwhelming. The pain is immediate and intense, but Bobby knows he has to push through it. Bobby attempts the gruesome task, driving the hooks through his flesh and trying to hoist himself up. But the pain is too much, the physical demand too great. He ultimately falls down and his chest is ripped open. Now, while he doesn't die on screen, this is one of the most painful moments in the franchise, and many fans have theorized that he went on to kill himself after all the torture he went through. Amanda Young. Young was Jigsaw's most infamous apprentice who discovered she'd been manipulated all along.
I don't mean anything to you.
Oh, you mean everything to me.
Leading to a psychological breakdown that made her physical death even more devastating. Amanda had survived her own trap in the first Saw film and became John Kramer's most devoted follower. She believed in his philosophy, carried out his work, and saw herself as continuing his mission. In many ways, she was the perfect student, dedicated, skilled, and completely committed to the cause. But Amanda's psychological state becomes increasingly unstable as she realizes the true extent of John's manipulation. She discovers that her own survival, her rescue, her entire relationship with him has been been orchestrated from the beginning. The realization that she's been a pawn in a larger game devastates her emotionally. During a final confrontation with Lynn Denlin, Amanda's mental state completely breaks down. She's caught between her loyalty to John and her growing understanding of how she's been used. The psychological trauma of this revelation becomes too much to bear. In the chaotic shootout that follows, Amanda is shot in the neck. The wound is severe and immediately life-threatening. But what makes Amanda's death especially harrowing is the layered emotional trauma that accompanies it. She's dying not just from the bullet, but from the complete collapse of her worldview. The pain is physical, but the real agony comes from the betrayal, the regret, and the devastating realization that everything she believed about her relationship with John was a lie. But before I show you the worst ones, if you're enjoying this video so far, hit the subscribe button. Do it! Xavier Chavez. Chavez was one of the most aggressive and ruthless survivors in the nerve gas house who became increasingly violent as the situation deteriorated. Xavier starts the nerve gas house game like everyone else, scared, confused, and desperate to find a way out. But as the situation becomes more dire and the nerve gas continues to affect everyone, Xavier's approach becomes increasingly ruthless and violent. The key to survival in this particular game involves finding numbers that have been tattooed onto the victim's skin. These numbers are needed to unlock the safe containing the antidote. While others try to work together or find alternative solutions, Xavier decides to take a more direct approach. He becomes obsessed with literally cutting the numbers out of people's skin. Xavier transforms from a fellow victim into a predator, hunting down other survivors and mutilating them to get what he needs. His desperation overrides any sense of morality or cooperation. This violent approach escalates throughout the game as Xavier becomes more and more aggressive. He's no longer trying to save everyone. He's focused solely on his own survival, regardless of what it costs others. In a final confrontation with Daniel, the son of Detective Matthews, Xavier's violence finally meets its match. The fight is brutal and up close, with both participants fighting for their lives in the most direct way possible. Xavier takes a knife directly to the neck during this close-quarters combat. The wound is immediately fatal, ending his violent rampage in an equally violent death. Laura Hunter. Hunter was trapped in the nerve gas house and faced one of the most drawn-out and agonizing deaths in the entire franchise. Laura is among the group of victims trapped in the nerve gas house, but unlike others who face specific traps or violent encounters, her death comes from the house's primary threat, the nerve gas itself that's slowly poisoning everyone inside. While other victims search for antidotes, fight each other, or attempt to escape, Laura becomes one of the first to succumb to the nerve gas poisoning. She has no access to an antidote and no means of escape, making her situation completely hopeless from the start. The nerve gas doesn't kill quickly or cleanly. Instead, it causes a slow, systematic breakdown of the nervous system. Laura experiences excruciating pain as the poison works its way through her body, attacking her ability to function normally. The symptoms are horrific. Painful convulsions rack her body as her nervous system begins to fail. She loses control of her motor functions, becoming increasingly helpless as the poison takes effect. The paralysis spreads gradually, making her aware of what's happening but unable to do anything about it. Laura slowly suffocates as the nerve gas completes its work. Her death is drawn out and agonizing, with no hope of rescue or relief. She's forced to endure the complete failure of her body's systems while remaining conscious of what's happening to her. But none of these deaths are as bad as the last one. Lawrence Gordon. Gordon was one of the franchise's earliest and most iconic victims, a doctor who faced an impossible choice that would define the entire Saw franchise. Dr. Lawrence Gordon finds himself chained by the ankle in a grimy bathroom, facing what appears to be an impossible situation. He's trapped with another victim, Adam, and given a simple but horrifying choice: kill Adam by 6 o'clock or watch his family die. The bathroom setup seems designed to break down everything Gordon represents as a medical professional. Instead of healing, he's being asked to kill. Instead of using his skills to save lives, he's forced to consider taking one. The psychological pressure builds as the 6 o'clock deadline approaches. But Gordon discovers a third option, one that requires him to make the most horrific decision any doctor could face. The only way to escape his ankle chain is to use a rusty hacksaw that's been provided, but it's not strong enough to cut through the chain itself. Gordon realizes he has to saw through his own foot to escape. This isn't a quick decision. It's a gradual realization that becomes more desperate as time runs out. The rusty hacksaw is dull and crude, designed to make the process as agonizing as possible. After freeing himself, Gordon drags himself away, soaked in blood and barely alive.
The angel trap. Detective Kerry was haunted by not being able to save previous victims, which made her the perfect target for Amanda Young. But here's the thing. Kerry wouldn't be able to beat her trap no matter what she did. She woke up suspended in a harness with her ribs locked into a mechanical device. The instructions were clear. Retrieve a key from a vat of acid to unlock herself. And Kerry did exactly that. She plunged her hand into the acid, suffering horrific burns, but she got that key. She unlocked the padlock, just like the tape told her to. By Jigsaw's rules, she should have lived, but the trap didn't release her. The timer expired, and the device violently tore her ribcage open anyway. Why? Because Amanda had sabotaged the mechanism. The key and lock were completely useless. Survival was impossible, no matter what Kerry did. This wasn't a test of will or redemption like Jigsaw claimed. It was just murder disguised as a choice. But Kerry's rigged trap wasn't the only one designed to kill regardless of the victim's efforts. The brazen bull. Bobby Dagan built his entire career on a lie about surviving a jigsaw trap. So when the real disciples came for him, they used his wife Joyce as leverage, trapping her inside a brazen bull. The rules seemed straightforward enough. Bobby had to lift himself using hooks through his chest to reach a height that would save Joyce. This was supposed to mirror the fake ordeal he'd been claiming to survive for years. Bobby actually tried. He impaled his chest with the hooks and attempted to hoist himself up. But here's the problem. The human body simply cannot support that kind of weight through flesh. The hooks inevitably tore through Bobby's chest before he could reach the necessary height. The challenge was physically impossible, which meant Joyce was always going to burn alive in that bull. Bobby's efforts were meaningless from the start. At least Bobby had a chance to try. Some victims didn't even get that luxury. The death mask. Michael Marks was a police informant who betrayed his associates.
You've made a living watching others. Society would call you an informant, a rat, a snitch.
He woke up with the Venus flytrap, a steel mask lined with nails locked around his head. The instructions seemed simple. The key to his freedom was behind his own eye, surgically implanted. He had a scalpel and 60 seconds to retrieve it. Michael frantically tried to work up the courage to cut out his own eye, but he hesitated, unable to inflict that kind of gruesome wound on himself. Time ran out, and the mask snapped shut, driving nails into his skull. But think about what was actually being asked here. Remove your own eye with a scalpel, extract a key, and unlock a complex mechanism, all in 60 seconds while in a state of complete panic. The psychological barrier alone makes this nearly impossible for any normal person. The time limit was so short that even if someone could overcome the mental block of self-mutilation,
They'd still probably run out of time, fumbling with the lock, if they didn't pass out. Michael's hesitation killed him. But the next victim had no time to hesitate at all. The wire saw trap. Valentina was one of the fake doctors who scammed John Kramer in Mexico. She woke up chained with her leg marked for amputation and 3 minutes to extract bone marrow.
Valentina, look at me. Look at me. You can do this. No.
Valentina actually started sawing through her own leg. She somehow endured the excruciating pain and managed to sever the limb completely. Then she inserted the vacuum device into her femur and began the marrow extraction process. She did everything right, followed every instruction, pushed through unimaginable agony. But the marrow extraction was too slow. Even with her leg completely removed, she couldn't get the required amount fast enough. The timer expired, and a razor wire mechanism beheaded her. The task was mathematically impossible. The human body doesn't produce marrow quickly enough to meet those requirements in that time frame. Valentina died not because she lacked determination, but because the laws of physics worked against her. Some traps killed through impossible time constraints, but others killed through human betrayal. The shotgun collar. Dr. Lynn Denlin was kidnapped to keep John Kramer alive through emergency brain surgery. Amanda fitted her with a shotgun collar connected to John's heart monitor. If he died, she died. Lynn successfully performed the brain surgery under impossible conditions. She kept the dying serial killer alive against all odds, proving her medical skill and will to survive. By every measure, she'd completed her test. But Amanda refused to release her. Amanda was emotionally unstable and jealous of the attention John gave Lynn. She shot Lynn anyway, just as Jeff, Lynn's husband, arrived on the scene. Jeff killed Amanda in retaliation, then made his own choice about John's fate. He slashed John's throat, which triggered Lynn's collar. It exploded, killing her instantly. Lynn's survival had nothing to do with her own actions or choices. She did everything perfectly, but she died because of Amanda's jealousy and Jeff's decision to kill John. No amount of medical skill or determination could save her from factors completely outside her control. Lynn trusted the wrong person, but the next victim was betrayed from the very beginning. The laser collar. Detective Halloran found himself in what appeared to be a final test with Logan, both wearing laser collars. The rules seemed straightforward. Admit your guilt, and you'll be spared. Both men were subjected to psychological torment as the lasers activated. Halloran, believing the game was real, admitted his guilt and expected to be freed according to Jigsaw's usual rules. He followed the instructions perfectly and confessed his wrongdoings.
But Logan was secretly orchestrating the entire game. He faked his own death and revealed himself as the true mastermind behind everything. Despite Halloran's compliance with the stated rules, Logan activated the collar anyway, slicing Halloran's head open.
Now I speak for the lives ruined by people like you. Murderers, rapists.
The confession was meaningless because Logan never intended to let him survive. This wasn't about redemption or learning a lesson. Logan used Jigsaw's methods for pure revenge, making Halloran's choices irrelevant. The trap was rigged from the start by someone who had no intention of following Jigsaw's twisted code. At least Halloran could speak his confession. The next victim's voice became her death sentence. The silent circle. A woman woke up surrounded by metal spikes with one simple rule. If she made any sound, the spikes would fire and kill her. The only escape was for another person to pull a key through her throat.
Mommy, help me! Get me out of here!
As the key was dragged up through her throat and out her mouth, the pain was absolutely excruciating. She tried desperately to remain silent, knowing that even the smallest sound would trigger her death, but the agony was so intense that involuntary screams escaped her lips. The spikes fired immediately, killing her. The trap exploited basic human biology. When you're in extreme pain, your body produces involuntary responses, including vocal ones. Asking someone to stay completely silent while having a metal object dragged through their throat is like asking them to stop their heart from beating. It's not a matter of willpower or determination. The human nervous system doesn't work that way. Her screams were an automatic biological response, but some victims faced traps that were mechanically broken from the beginning. The classroom trap. Troy was a repeat offender who woke up in a classroom with chains piercing through his arms, legs, and jaw. He had to rip them all out before a bomb detonated. Troy frantically tore the chains from his arms and legs, enduring massive pain but making progress. Then he reached the chain through his jaw and realized the horrible truth. It was impossible to remove without fatal injury. You can't rip a chain through your jawbone and survive the damage. But even if Troy had somehow managed to free himself from every chain, investigators later discovered that the door had been welded shut. There was no escape route even if he'd completed the seemingly impossible task. The trap had multiple layers of impossibility stacked on top of each other. Troy was alone in his death, but the final trap took multiple victims at once.
The cycle trap. Multiple victims woke up chained in a barn, each wearing a collar attached to a winch, pulling them toward spinning blades. They were told confessing their sins would stop the machine.
Hello, Mitch. You've admitted to selling a boy a motorcycle. But you've not told the entire story, have you? Even though you knew the brakes were faulty. You took his $600.
As the winches activated, the victims struggled desperately to free themselves. Some managed to confess their wrongdoings, following the stated rules, but the machine kept spinning regardless of their confessions. The spinning blades claimed victim after victim, shredding anyone who couldn't escape in time. The setup was so chaotic, and the machine moved so fast that there was virtually no time for strategy or careful planning. Unlike other jigsaw traps that gave victims time to think and choose, this one operated on pure speed and violence. Human reaction time simply wasn't fast enough to deal with the mechanical precision of the death machine. These victims died in seconds, with no real opportunity to prove their will to live.
Water cube trap. The water cube trap seals Agent Strahm's head in a plexiglass cube, filling with water, with no tape explaining the rules. Strahm survives via emergency pen tracheotomy, but real-world success rates for this improvisation are extremely low due to drowning panic and lack of proper tools. The pen tracheotomy requires anatomical knowledge, steady hands despite panic, and luck in avoiding major blood vessels. Strahm's survival represents an outlier rather than a reasonable expectation. Most victims would drown before even thinking about doing this procedure on themselves. Pig vat trap. The pig vat trap shows Judge Halden chained in a vat filling with liquefied rotting pig remains while Jeff must burn his deceased son's mementos to stop the flow. Jeff's grief makes burning his son's belongings psychologically difficult. The pig slurry rises steadily while Jeff struggles emotionally with destroying the last physical connections to his dead child. Judge Halden drowns in rotting flesh and bodily fluids while begging Jeff to act faster. The dependency on another person's emotional state rather than physical capability makes this trap unbeatable in practice. Jeff's trauma prevents the quick action needed, and Halden pays the price for someone else's psychological barriers. The gross out factor adds horror to the helplessness. The pig vat is merciful compared to what happens in the rack trap. Rack trap. The rack trap crucifies Timothy Young on a rotating device with metal arms that twist his limbs 360 degrees sequentially, then his neck. Jeff Denlin must retrieve a key from a shotgun-rigged box to free Timothy before the mechanism completes its rotation. The delay in reaching the the key causes fatal twisting, even if Jeff acts quickly, with Timothy's limbs breaking and rotating beyond repair. The irreversible damage occurs even if rescue arrives partway through the sequence. Physiological breakdowns note that twisting limbs causes permanent nerve, muscle, and bone damage that leads to shock and organ failure. Timothy's neck twist at the end guarantees death, but the earlier limb rotations already induced fatal trauma. Jigsaw favored this trap for its poetic justice, given Timothy's drunk driving that killed Jeff's son, but Amanda's influence added sabotage layers, ensuring maximum suffering. The time delay makes rescue theoretically possible but practically impossible, creating false hope. Time constraints make rescue unlikely, but environmental conditions eliminate hope entirely. Freezer room. The freezer room trap chains. Danica got naked in a freezer with water spraying on her, while Jeff must retrieve a key from behind frozen pipes. Hypothermia sets in so quickly that rescue becomes impossible before Danica freezes to death, her body becoming covered in ice within minutes of exposure. The rapid onset of hypothermia in freezing water spray makes survival dependent on immediate rescue that Jeff cannot provide quickly enough. Danica's pleas become weaker as her core temperature drops, with ice forming on her skin and hair. The key's location behind pipes adds deliberate delay. The environmental cruelty emphasizes physical suffering over agency, as Danica has zero control while Jeff struggles with frozen metal. By the time Jeff retrieves the key, Danica is already frozen solid, her body a horrific ice sculpture of her final desperate pose. Environmental conditions doom victims rapidly, but self-inflicted pain creates its own insurmountable barriers. Bedroom trap. The bedroom trap chains rapist Ivan spread eagle to a bed in a motel, with blades positioned to tear through his limbs unless he presses buttons to gouge out both his eyes within 60 seconds. Photos of his victims trigger the test, but the pain barrier and self-inflicted blindness make completing the task unattainable while maintaining consciousness and motor control. Gouging out one eye causes shock that makes continuing to the second nearly impossible. The self-blinding aspect combined with extreme pain creates physiological barriers that willpower cannot overcome. Ivan's crimes make viewers feel the trap is deserved, but the design ensures death regardless of effort. The trap satisfies viewers due to Ivan's horrific actions, but survival odds remain at 10% in analyses due to the insurmountable agony involved. The mechanism activates and tears Ivan's limbs apart when he cannot complete the eye removal. Self-inflicted pain is very brutal, but these next traps are super evil and force the body to do things that cannot be stopped. Venus flytrap. The Venus flytrap, or death mask from Saw 2, locks a spiked mask around Michael Mark's neck that snaps shut in 60 seconds unless he retrieves a key surgically implanted behind his eye. A scalpel is provided, but the precision required to cut out an eye while under extreme duress and pain is essentially impossible without fatal injury or missing the timer. Self-extracting a key from behind the eye requires surgical precision that becomes unattainable under pain and time pressure. Blood loss from eye removal likely causes fatal shock, and the tight timer prevents careful work. Experts deem the trauma and precision requirements impossible without anesthesia and proper surgical tools. The trap connects to Dr. Gordon's fate, with hints including X-rays showing the key's location. Originally, the victim was supposed to vomit upon realization, but the execution involves the mask snapping shut and crushing Michael's head in a spray of gore. But if you thought self-surgery was bad, the Silent Circle makes that look easy because it exploits something you literally cannot control. Silent Circle. The Silent Circle targets Nina, a publicist who has her mouth propped open with spikes aimed at her throat. Her companion Bobby Dagan must fish a key from her stomach using a hook on a string, but any noise above a whisper advances the spikes into her throat. The retrieval process induces inevitable screams from the pain of internal organs being hooked and pulled. The physiological impossibility of remaining silent during such extreme pain guarantees failure. Human vocal responses to severe trauma are involuntary reflexes that cannot be suppressed through willpower alone. Nina's open mouth makes controlling sound production even harder, as she cannot bite down or muffle screams. Discussions point to the trap's design deliberately exploiting unavoidable biological responses to pain. The spikes pierce Nina's throat multiple times as she screams from the hook, tearing through her stomach lining, making this trap unbeatable by design rather than difficulty. Biological responses doom some victims, while physical limitations destroy others. Horsepower trap. The horsepower trap glues Evan to a car seat with his back skin attached, requiring him to rip his skin off within 30 seconds to pull a lever that stops a chain reaction killing his friends. The skin's elasticity and and the pain shock prevent completion, making the 30-second limit far too short for such severe self-mutilation. The trap critiques racism with complex symbolism while ensuring death. Human skin elasticity limits mean tearing back skin causes shock-induced failure before freeing the body. The glue's strength combined with the 30-second countdown ensures inadequate time to overcome pain reflexes and physical tearing resistance. Even if Evans succeeded, the subsequent chain reaction would likely still kill others due to timing. This represents one of the franchise's most complex multi-victim setups, with Evans' failure triggering a car dropping on his girlfriend's arms, tires rolling over another friend, and a third being launched into spikes. The horsepower reference ties to Evans' racist past, but the physical impossibility remains regardless of symbolic justice. Skin elasticity creates limits, but time constraints make medical procedures utterly impossible. Wire saw trap. The wire saw trap chains Valentina with a giggly wire saw, requiring her to amputate her leg above the knee and then vacuum bone marrow into a container within 3 minutes to avoid decapitation by a blade. The time limit combined with pain and blood loss makes completion physiologically impossible, as self-amputation causes shock that prevents continuing to the marrow extraction phase. The pain from sawing through bone with a wire makes maintaining consciousness improbable before completing the first step. Blood loss accelerates during amputation, causing dizziness and weakness that prevent precise marrow extraction. The 3-minute timer ensures inadequate time even for trained medical professionals under ideal conditions. Debates question whether Jigsaw intended escape given the extreme demands, with Saw X highlighting his medical-themed vengeance. The setup includes a box of tools, but the self-surgery horror combined with the timer pushes beyond human pain thresholds and dexterity limits. At least Valentina had a theoretical chance. The next victim was cooked before even starting. Brain surgery trap. The brain surgery trap restrains Matteo in a chair with a cranial device, requiring him to craniotomize his own skull, extract a piece of brain tissue, and dissolve it in acid for a key within 3 minutes, or a heated mask closes on his face. Medical feasibility is the core critique, as self-performed brain extraction defies surgical possibility and human capability, even with tools provided. The precision required for accessing brain tissue without causing immediate death or incapacity makes this trap effectively unsurvivable. Cranial surgery requires steady hands and specific knowledge that become impossible when you're the patient. Even trained neurosurgeons couldn't perform this on themselves under time pressure and pain. The trap receives 0% survival odds across analyses due to medical infeasibility. Matteo's plasticity issues aside, the core problem is that self-brain surgery contradicts every principle of neurology and human capability. The 3-minute timer adds absurdity to impossibility, but the next traps are pure sabotage where survival was never an option. Classroom trap. The classroom trap targets Troy, a repeat offender who awakens in a derelict classroom with 11 chains hooked through his skin, muscles, and jaw. He must rip all of them out within 90 seconds to escape before a nail bomb detonates. Despite removing most chains, the final jaw chain proves too agonizing to extract in time. But even success wouldn't have mattered because Amanda welded the exit door shut. Yes, you heard that right. A welded door means Amanda never really intended on letting anyone survive this. And if she sabotaged this one, how many others were rigged from the start? Turns out it's way more than I even thought. Everything from this point forward was designed to kill, not test. Troy's pain tolerance and determination become irrelevant when the only escape route is permanently sealed. The time limit of 90 seconds is already insufficient for the physical trauma involved in tearing chains from bone and tissue. Critiques highlight the welded door as deliberate sabotage by Amanda Young, who increasingly designed traps for guaranteed kills rather than rehabilitation. The trap's design exceeds human pain tolerance while eliminating the promised escape route, making survival literally impossible regardless of willpower. The classroom trap proves Amanda stopped following Jigsaw's rules. No rehabilitation, no chance, just murder with extra steps. And once that line was crossed, the apprentices started designing traps that were pure execution. Watch how much worse it gets. Hot wax trap. The hot wax trap traps Angie Garza on a table under a boiler of boiling wax that pours onto her, requiring her to sever her cervical spine with a blade to stop the suffocating wax. Survival post-severance is biologically impossible, as cutting the spine causes immediate paralysis or death. The wax cools quickly, but severance ensures death regardless. The requirement to sever one's own spine to halt suffering represents choosing between two lethal options. Spinal severance at the neck level causes instant death or complete paralysis with respiratory failure. The boiling wax suffocation is horrible, but the escape is equally fatal. Critics note this trap and spiral as particularly nihilistic, offering no real survival path. The biological impossibility of surviving spine severance makes this a choice between two deaths rather than a test. Angie's fate is sealed regardless of her decision. Lethal choices offer no hope, but dependency on impossible tasks dooms others. Brazen Bull. The Brazen Bull encases Joyce Dan in a brass oven shaped like a bull, while her survival hinges on husband Bobby completing a separate trap involving hooks through his pectoral muscles to hoist himself upward. Bobby must lift his entire body weight using torn chest muscles, a task that causes muscle tearing and renders the full lift impossible. Joyce incinerates when Bobby fails due to his physical limitations, rather than any action she could take. The dependency on an unbeatable linked task makes this collaborative yet fatal, showing how one person's physical impossibility dooms another. Joyce has zero control over her fate, trapped inside heating metal while Bobby's chest muscles literally tear apart under his body weight. The hooks rip through his pectorals before he reaches the required height. Franchise analyses note this trap as particularly cruel because it creates helplessness for both parties. Bobby experiences the horror of causing his wife's death despite maximum effort, while Joyce dies knowing her husband tried but physically couldn't succeed. Physical impossibility dooms dependence, but orchestrator deceit makes tests meaningless. Laser collar. The laser collar trap involves Logan Nelson and Detective Halloran wearing collars with lasers that slice the neck unless a confession is made within 60 seconds. Halloran confesses to corruption, but Logan activates Halloran's collar anyway because Logan is the orchestrator seeking revenge rather than redemption. The trap's survivability depends entirely on the orchestrator's mercy rather than the victim's actions. Confession doesn't guarantee release when the person controlling the trap has no intention of sparing the victim. Halloran's honesty becomes meaningless against Logan's deceit and personal vendetta. The mechanics work perfectly but are weaponized for murder rather than testing, with Logan having planned Halloran's execution from the beginning. Critics note this trap's sci-fi flair feels out of place in the franchise while highlighting the corruption of Jigsaw's philosophy. The lasers sourced from a coroner's office add dark irony, but the core problem remains that orchestrator control nullifies any genuine test. Deceit makes some traps insidious, but rigged mechanics with deceptive keys prove even worse. Angel Trap. The Angel Trap suspends Detective Addison Corde with brackets hooked into her ribcage, requiring her to retrieve a key from a jar of acid to unlock the device before it spreads her ribs apart like wings. Kerry successfully retrieves the key despite the acid burns and unlocks the mechanism, but the trap doesn't release because the key dissolves the lock without actually disarming the device. The acid's role in misleading victims ensures failure by destroying the lock mechanism rather than opening it properly. Kerry follows all instructions correctly, endures the chemical burns, and still dies because Amanda rigged the trap from the start. Sources note the key's ineffectiveness as proof of Amanda's departure from Jigsaw's philosophy. This trap represents pure deception, where even perfect execution leads to death. The psychological torture of believing salvation is possible while actually facing guaranteed death adds cruelty beyond physical pain. Kerry's death proves competence and courage mean nothing against rigged mechanics, but even Amanda's deception pales compared to Hoffman's complete betrayal. Pendulum Trap. The Pendulum Trap appears as a revenge setup by Detective Mark Hoffman against murderer Seth Baxter, who is strapped to a table with a massive pendulum blade swinging toward his torso. To escape, Seth must crush both his hands and vices within 60 seconds to supposedly release the restraints. The trap exemplifies rigging at its worst because even after Seth complies and destroys his hands, the pendulum continues swinging and bisects him anyway. The release mechanism was never connected to the hand crushers, making compliance completely pointless. Hoffman designed this trap purely for execution rather than testing, directly violating Jigsaw's philosophy of survivable lessons. Seth screams and crushes his hands to pulp, enduring excruciating pain for nothing as the blade cuts through his body regardless. Analysts emphasize the trap's impossibility stems from the non-functional release mechanism rather than any physical limitation of the victim. This represents a stark deviation from Jigsaw's stated rules, revealing how apprentices like Hoffman corrupted the original philosophy into murder devices disguised as tests. Paul Leahy. Paul was a healthy guy who had attempted suicide by cutting his wrists the previous month. Jigsaw saw this as unforgivable waste and decided Paul needed to learn to appreciate his life through suffering.
You'll show me. If you want to live, you'll have to cut yourself again.
At least Paul has someone looking out for him. He was placed in a basement maze constructed entirely of razor wire with 2 hours to navigate through it and escape. Paul crawled through the razor wire maze, getting progressively more lacerations across his body with each movement. The wire cuts caused mounting blood loss, while his desperation grew with every failed attempt to find a path through. Paul's self-preservation instinct wasn't strong enough to overcome the physical impossibility of the challenge. He eventually lost consciousness from blood loss and died in the maze. Paul's death established Jigsaw's twisted methodology, strategy, but law enforcement was about to get their first taste of his strategic thinking. Detective Stephen Singh. Singh was investigating the Jigsaw killings with his partner Detective Tapp when they tracked John Kramer to his warehouse lair. After Jigsaw slashed Tapp's throat and fled, Singh pursued the killer through dingy hallways filled with what seemed like harmless cobwebs. But Jigsaw had prepared for this exact scenario by rigging his escape route with multiple traps. Of course he prepared for this. When Singh stepped through the cobwebs, he tripped a wire that triggered ceiling-mounted shotguns positioned throughout the hallway. The shotguns fired downward simultaneously, obliterating Singh's head in a spray of gore and brain matter. The detective died instantly from the multiple shotgun blasts to his skull. Singh's death proved Jigsaw would kill cops without hesitation, but his partner's obsession would lead to even more tragedy. David Tapp. Tapp survived the warehouse encounter but became consumed with proving Dr. Gordon's involvement in the Jigsaw murders after being discharged from the police force. His obsession led him to surveil Gordon's family, putting him directly in the path of Zep Hindle, who was holding them hostage. Tapp believed he was chasing down Jigsaw's accomplice when he cornered Zep in underground tunnels. During their confrontation, Zep outmaneuvered the obsessed detective and shot him in the chest. Tapp died believing Gordon was Jigsaw, completely unaware that Zep was just another victim following instructions to get an antidote for slow-acting poison. His misplaced suspicions cost him his life. Tapp died chasing the wrong person, and that same person would soon face his own brutal end. Zep Hindle. Zep believed he was Jigsaw's apprentice, but he was actually another victim who had been poisoned and forced to follow elaborate instructions. His job was to kill Dr. Gordon's family if Gordon failed to murder Adam by 6 a.m. When Gordon appeared to fail the test, Zep prepared to execute the doctor's wife and complete his mission. Adam Stanheight, who had survived Gordon's gunshot wound, surprised Zep by bludgeoning him to death with a toilet tank lid. What the hell? Zep died from repeated blows to the head, his skull cracking under the porcelain impacts. Only after searching Zep's body did Adam discover a tape revealing that Zep had been just another victim, not Jigsaw's helper. The poor guy was just trying to survive. Zep's death revealed Jigsaw's manipulation, but the original film's other casualties remain mysterious. Mark and Donnie Greco. These two victims died as part of the broader Jigsaw investigation, though their specific circumstances connect to the events surrounding the bathroom trap. Both men were casualties of Jigsaw's expanding influence, as law enforcement and civilians alike got caught in his web of games and tests. Their deaths represent the collateral damage that Jigsaw's philosophy created beyond his intended victims. Mark and Donnie died because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time when Jigsaw's games began affecting everyone around them. The original killings were just the beginning, as Jigsaw's next game would trap 8 people in a house filled with deadly nerve gas. Michael Marks. Michael found himself in the Venus flytrap, an Iron Maiden-style death mask secured around his neck with a timer mechanism. The tape informed him that the key to freedom had been surgically implanted behind one of his eyes. He had to gouge out his own eye with provided tools, including a scalpel and mirror, to retrieve the key before time ran out. Michael started the gruesome self-surgery, pressing the scalpel against his eye socket while looking in the mirror. Despite beginning to cut into his own eye, he couldn't overcome his survival instincts enough to complete the horrific task. The timer expired and the mask snapped shut around his head, crushing his skull completely. His inability to mutilate himself cost him his life. Michael's death opened Saw 2 with extreme brutality, setting the tone for what 8 people trapped in the nerve gas house would face. Gus Collard. Gus was trapped in the nerve gas house with 7 other victims, all connected to Detective Eric Matthews' corrupt cases. Despite Amanda's warnings about following Jigsaw's rules exactly, Xavier ignored the note that explicitly stated, "Do not attempt to use this key on the door to this room." Xavier's reckless impatience put everyone in danger, starting with Gus. When Xavier used the provided key anyway, it triggered a Magnum revolver positioned at eye level with the door's peephole. The gun fired directly through Gus's eye socket, sending a bullet straight into his brain. Gus died instantly from the gunshot, becoming the first victim to die because someone else ignored Jigsaw's instructions. Gus's death revealed the combination numbers on the back of each victim's neck, but Xavier's discovery would lead to much worse violence. Obi Tate. The other house victims discovered that Obi had assisted Jigsaw in their abduction, making him deeply unpopular when his role was revealed. The furnace trap in the basement required someone to crawl through a furnace chamber to retrieve 2 antidotes at the back. Obi volunteered for this task, planning to take 1 antidote for himself and leave the other for someone else. When Obi grabbed the second syringe, the furnace door automatically closed, trapping him inside as the flames ignited. His body was literally cooked alive, while his head stuck out through a small window. Obi's agonized screams filled the basement as he burned to death, creating one of the most viscerally disturbing moments in the franchise. Obi's cooperation with Jigsaw led to his own torturous death, while upstairs the nerve gas was slowly killing another victim, Laura Hunter. Laura succumbed to the nerve agent that threatened all house occupants rather than dying from an elaborate trap. As the sarin-like gas progressed through her system, Laura began experiencing severe symptoms, including blood from her mouth and violent convulsions. She collapsed while the group discussed their connections to Detective Matthews. Amanda cradled Laura as she died from the nerve gas poisoning, her body shutting down from the toxic chemicals. Before her death, Laura discovered the crucial clue, X marks the spot, written on a picture frame that revealed Daniel's connection to Eric Matthews. Her relatively peaceful death from poisoning contrasted with the mechanical brutality everyone else would face. Laura's discovery exposed Daniel's identity, but Xavier's violent response to this information would turn deadly. Jonas Singer. Jonas tried to resist when Xavier attempted to forcibly read the number on the back of his neck for the safe combination. The nerve gas had made Xavier increasingly unstable and violent, leading to a physical confrontation between the two men. Jonas initially fought back successfully, knocking Xavier to the ground and seemingly gaining the upper hand. However, the nerve gas had weakened Jonas considerably, and as he bent over in exhaustion, Xavier grabbed a nail-studded baseball bat. Xavier drove the weapon into the back of Jonas's head, killing him with a single brutal blow. The nails penetrated Jonas's skull and brain, ending his life instantly. Jonas's murder marked Xavier's transformation from reluctant participant to active killer, and his next victim would suffer an even worse fate. Addison Corde. Addison discovered a glass box containing an antidote syringe, but she didn't listen to the recorded instructions or properly examine the trap before acting. Her panic and desperation made her immediately reach through openings on both sides of the box to grab the antidote. The moment she touched it, the antidote spilled and became useless. Razor-sharp blades hidden within the openings prevented Addison from withdrawing her arms from the box. She was trapped with her arms being sliced by the razors, bleeding heavily while screaming for help. When Xavier found her, he callously read the number from her neck and left her to bleed to death from her severed arteries. Addison's impatience turned a survivable trap into a death sentence, but Xavier's killing spree was about to end violently. Xavier Chavez. Xavier had murdered Jonas and abandoned Addison to die, making him the house's primary threat. He cornered Amanda and Daniel in the basement bathroom, planning to harvest Daniel's number for the safe combination. When Amanda pointed out that Xavier would never learn his own number,
Know your own number. How are you gonna get it if I don't tell you?
since no one would read it to him after his violent behavior, Xavier flew into a desperate rage. Xavier used broken glass to cut away skin from the back of his own neck, trying to read his number in a mirror, while blood poured from the self-inflicted wounds. As he charged toward Amanda and Daniel with murderous intent, Daniel suddenly sprang up and slashed Xavier's throat with a hacksaw. The blade cut deep through Xavier's neck, severing his carotid artery and killing him quickly. Xavier's death ended the nerve gas house massacre, but the SWAT team outside faced their own deadly surprises. SWAT officers. 2 police officers died during the investigation of the nerve gas house from electrocution traps that Jigsaw had prepared around the building's perimeter. These booby traps were designed to discourage law enforcement interference and protect the integrity of the game inside. The officers were killed instantly when they triggered the electrical mechanisms. Their death showed that Jigsaw's preparation extended beyond his primary victims to anyone who might interfere with his games. Law enforcement was just as vulnerable to his traps as his chosen test subjects. The nerve gas house was just the beginning, as Jigsaw's most personal and brutal tests were still to come. Detective Allison Kerry. Kerry had become a familiar character over 2 films, making her death particularly shocking for audiences. She was suspended in the angel trap, a device that resembled wings spreading from her back. The mechanism slowly pulled apart her rib cage, while she was told the key to freedom lay in a glass container filled with acid positioned in front of her. Kerry attempted to retrieve the key by plunging her hand into the acid, burning her flesh while trying to save herself. However, Amanda had rigged this trap to be unwinnable, rather than following John's rehabilitation philosophy. Even though Kerry retrieved the key, the rib spreader mechanism completed its work, cracking her chest open entirely and exposing her internal organs. Kerry's death marked a turning point where even familiar characters weren't safe from Jigsaw's expanding influence. Timothy Young. Timothy was the drunk driver who had accidentally killed Jeff Denlon's son, and he found himself strapped to the rack, a device designed to systematically twist his head and limbs in directions they were never meant to go. Jeff had the opportunity to save Timothy by retrieving a key, but his desire for revenge made him hesitate too long while the machine did its work. The rack slowly rotated each of Timothy's limbs, audibly snapping bones and tearing muscles, while he screamed in unbearable agony. Each bone broke individually as the machine methodically destroyed his body. The trap continued twisting his arms and legs before finally snapping his neck, ending his torment. Timothy's death was designed to test Jeff's capacity for forgiveness, but revenge proved more powerful than mercy. Judge Halden. Judge Halden had sentenced Timothy to only 6 months in prison, making him another target for Jeff's anger. The judge was chained at the bottom of a large vat with rotting pig carcasses suspended suspended above him. Jeff had to choose between saving Halden or pursuing his revenge against Timothy, with the trap's timer forcing a decision. Jeff's inability to overcome his desire for vengeance in time resulted in the pig carcasses being incinerated and falling onto the judge below. The burning remains fell onto Halden, killing him in a gruesome display of fire and decay. His death emphasized the cost of holding on to anger and how innocent people suffer when forgiveness becomes impossible. Halden died because of Jeff's choices, but Amanda's deteriorating mental state would soon claim another victim, Lynn Denlin. Lynn was forced to perform brain surgery on John Kramer while wearing a collar rigged with shotgun shells that would detonate if John's heart rate flatlined. Despite successfully keeping John alive through multiple medical crises and enduring psychological torture from Amanda, Lynn's survival ultimately depended on factors beyond her control. When Amanda shot Lynn out of jealousy and paranoia, and Jeff subsequently killed John in revenge, the collar's mechanism activated automatically. The shotgun shells fired directly into Lynn's neck, killing her instantly as John's heart stopped. Her death represented the ultimate tragedy of innocent people suffering for others' crimes and choices. Lynn died because of Amanda and Jeff's actions, but both of them would face their own violent ends. Amanda Young. Amanda had strayed from John's rehabilitation philosophy by creating unwinnable traps designed for torture rather than testing. After shooting Lynn out of jealousy, Amanda found herself confronted by Jeff, who had just witnessed his wife's murder. Amanda's psychological deterioration had made her increasingly unstable and violent. In a moment of rage and grief over his wife's death, Jeff shot Amanda, mortally wounding her. Amanda's final moments showed her returning to some semblance of her original personality, expressing remorse for her actions. She died acknowledging that she had abandoned John's teachings and failed as his apprentice. Amanda's death represented the failure of Jigsaw's rehabilitation philosophy when applied to someone too damaged to truly change, John Kramer. After Amanda's death and discovering that she had killed his wife Lynn, Jeff turned his rage toward John himself. Despite John's warnings about the consequences,
One final test. The rules are simple. Over on that table.
and his explanations about the larger game, Jeff's desire for revenge overwhelmed his rational thinking. He grabbed a circular saw and approached the cancer-ridden Jigsaw killer. Jeff used the circular saw to slice John's throat, cutting deep through his neck, while John tried to warn him about Lynn's collar. John died from the throat wound, but his final trap activated as his heart stopped. Jeff's inability to forgive ultimately cost him both his wife and any chance of finding his daughter, as John took her location to his grave. John's death ended the original Jigsaw's reign of terror, but his posthumous games were already set in motion. Eric Matthews. Eric had survived since Saw 2, kept alive as leverage in Jigsaw's games after breaking his foot in an escape attempt. He was chained in a room as part of Officer Daniel Rigg's testing, but his death came not from his own actions but from Rigg's inability to follow instructions properly. When Rigg burst through a door in his attempt to rescue Matthews, the action triggered a mechanism that sent two massive ice blocks crashing down. The blocks hit Eric with tremendous force, crushing him to death instantly. The irony was that Eric had survived Jigsaw's games twice before, only to be killed by a fellow officer's well-intentioned but misguided rescue attempt. Eric's death proved that following instructions was crucial even for rescuers, but Officer Rigg's tests were far from over. Trevor found himself with his eyes sewn shut, shackled by the neck to his partner Art in the mausoleum trap. Art had his mouth sewn closed, but could see the key hanging from Trevor's collar. The two men were attached to a winch that slowly pulled them toward a painful death, requiring cooperation to survive. Trevor was given deadly tools while Art could see their escape route, but panic undermined their chances. In his blind state, Trevor accidentally activated the winch mechanism, accelerating their doom toward the spinning gears. Art was ultimately forced to kill Trevor with a hammer, striking him 4 times in the head to reach the key and free himself. Trevor's death showed how Jigsaw's traps forced victims to murder each other for survival, corrupting them in the process. Art had managed to kill Trevor and retrieve the key, but the psychological damage from murdering his partner left him traumatized. The mausoleum trap's design forced Art to commit murder to survive, fundamentally changing his character through the act of killing. Even though he escaped the immediate trap, the experience destroyed him mentally. Art died from the psychological trauma of being forced to kill Trevor, representing how Jigsaw's games corrupted even the survivors. His death occurred off-screen, but was confirmed as a result of the mental damage from his test. The trap succeeded in breaking Art even though he physically escaped. Art's psychological destruction proved that surviving Jigsaw's traps didn't guarantee real survival. Ivan Lansness. Ivan had a history of sexual assault and found himself strapped to a bed with metal contraptions attached to his limbs. The trap offered him a choice between stabbing out his own eye with provided tools or allowing the machine to rip his 4 limbs from his torso. Despite the threat of dismemberment, Ivan couldn't complete the required self-mutilation. Ivan initially attempted to destroy his eye, but failed to follow through with the gruesome self-surgery. The machine then proceeded with its work, systematically tearing his arms and legs from his body while he remained conscious, each limb separated from his torso in a display of mechanical drawing and quartering. Ivan's death was one of the most visually devastating in the franchise, showing the consequences of sexual violence through mechanical justice. Brenda. Brenda was secured in a chair with her hair fed into a mechanical contraption designed to slowly rip her scalp from her head as part of Officer Rigg's testing. The device was set on a 60-second timer, creating urgent pressure for Rigg to find the correct combination by turning gears to reveal numbers. Rigg successfully stopped the scalping device and prevented Brenda from losing her hair, but the trap's true nature was then revealed. When Brenda asked if Rigg was a police officer and he confirmed this, she attacked him with a hidden weapon. This revealed that Brenda was actually a willing participant rather than an innocent victim. Brenda's death came during her attack on Rigg, representing the trap's lesson about rushing into situations without understanding them completely. Additional saw 4 victims. Several other deaths occurred during Officer Rigg's journey through Jigsaw's posthumous game, each designed to teach him about his inability to save everyone and his tendency to act impulsively. These victims died because Rigg couldn't follow instructions properly, showing how his good intentions led to tragic consequences. The deaths were designed to break Rigg's savior complex and force him to understand that not everyone could be saved. Each victim represented a different aspect of Rigg's flawed approach to police work and his need for control. These deaths proved that Jigsaw's influence extended beyond his own life, but even more elaborate, posthumous games were being prepared. Seth Baxter. Seth had killed Detective Hoffman's sister and escaped conviction on a technicality, prompting Hoffman to create an elaborate fake jigsaw trap for revenge. Seth found himself positioned beneath a massive swinging pendulum blade that would slowly descend and slice through his abdomen unless he crushed his own hands in 2 presses. Seth complied with the gruesome requirement, destroying both hands in the crushing devices while screaming in agony.
Insert your hands and push the buttons to start the devices before you. Your bones will be crushed to dust.
However, Hoffman had rigged the trap to be unwinnable. The pendulum continued its descent regardless. The blade sliced through Seth's torso, cutting him in half and spraying his internal organs across the wall. Seth's death established that not all jigsaw-style traps were designed for survival, as other killers used the methodology for personal vendettas. Peter Strahm. Agent Strahm pursued Detective Hoffman to a derelict house and discovered a tape player with instructions telling him to climb inside a glass box to survive. Believing he was making the smart decision, Strahm ignored the tape and instead attacked Hoffman, forcing him into the box at gunpoint. If Strahm had listened to the complete recording, he would have learned that the box was protection from the room's true trap. The walls began closing in with no way to stop them, while Hoffman remained safe inside the protective cube. The room continued shrinking until it crushed Strahm completely, with bone-crunching sound effects emphasizing his horrific death. Strahm's inability to trust and follow instructions cost him his life in one of the franchise's most claustrophobic endings. Charles, Ashley, and Luba. These 3 were part of the Fatal 5 group, connected by their involvement in a deadly fire that killed several people for insurance money. They were placed in a series of connected traps designed to teach cooperation and sacrifice, but several failed to understand that the games required working together rather than individual survival. Charles, Ashley, and Luba died during their trials because they couldn't grasp that Jigsaw's design required group cooperation. Their deaths served as lessons for the surviving members about the importance of sacrifice and teamwork. Each death reinforced the theme that selfishness leads to destruction, while cooperation enables survival. Their deaths proved that understanding Jigsaw's philosophy was crucial for survival, but the insurance industry would face its own brutal reckoning. Eddie was a predatory lender locked in the pound of flesh trap with Simone, with both victims needing to cut flesh from their own bodies within 60 seconds.
Who will offer the most flesh in order to save their life? The choice is yours.
The person whose flesh weighed more would survive, while the loser would have screws drilled into their temples. Eddie's larger size initially seemed advantageous as he began slicing fat from his stomach. However, Simone made the decisive move by chopping off her entire arm with a meat cleaver, instantly tipping the scale in her favor. Eddie's multiple shallow cuts couldn't compete with Simone's single strategic amputation. When the timer expired, screws drilled directly into Eddie's temples, penetrating his brain and killing him instantly. Eddie's death opened Saw 6 with brutal efficiency, setting the tone for the insurance industry's comeuppance. Simone survived the pound of flesh trap by amputating her arm, but her survival came at a devastating cost. While she outlasted Eddie and escaped the temple screws, the massive blood loss from her self-amputation and the trauma of using a meat cleaver on herself left her in critical condition. Simone's victory was Pyrrhic, as she collapsed from blood loss and shock after the trap ended. Despite winning the competition, she died from the injuries she inflicted on herself to survive. Her death proved that even winning Jigsaw's games often meant death anyway. Simone's sacrifice revealed the cruel irony of Jigsaw's tests, where survival often came with fatal consequences. Hank was an elderly janitor with a smoking habit who faced William Easton in a breathing contest based on lung capacity. The test required both men to hold their breath as long as possible, with the loser dying from the trap's mechanism. Hank's years of smoking and heart conditions made this essentially an impossible challenge for him. Given his compromised respiratory system and age disadvantage, Hank couldn't compete with William's healthier lungs. When William inevitably outlasted him in the breath-holding contest, Hank died from the trap's mechanism. His death served as both punishment for his smoking habit and a lesson to William about arbitrary survival based on health conditions. Hank's death was predetermined by his lifestyle choices, but William's employees would face more direct consequences for their actions. Josh was one of 6 insurance company employees strapped to the rotating carousel equipped with a shotgun. Each employee had participated in finding loopholes to deny insurance coverage to desperate clients, making them targets for William's tests. The carousel played creepy circus music while William decided who would live or die. When the carousel stopped and the shotgun pointed at Josh, he delivered a final speech, expressing his fury at William before facing execution. Josh's rage and terror were evident as he realized William would choose someone else to save. The shotgun fired directly into Josh's chest, killing him instantly while the carousel continued rotating. Josh's death represented the consequences of denying insurance coverage to people who needed help to survive. Other carousel victims. Several other insurance employees died on the rotating carousel as William made his selections. Gina desperately claimed to be pregnant, hoping William would spare her life.
I'm pregnant! No, she's not! She's lying! She fucking lied!
Though other victims disputed this claim. Each death was accompanied by the haunting circus music and the mechanical rotation of the device. The carousel victims died because of their roles in the insurance denial process, with each death serving as punishment for their participation. Their terror was amplified by watching others die while waiting for their own potential execution. The shotgun's random targeting created psychological torture alongside the physical threat. These deaths proved that corporate greed had deadly consequences when Jigsaw's justice system took control. Debbie was trapped in a steam-filled maze while William tried to guide her through the safe path. The key to her freedom had been surgically sewn into William's side, creating a painful dilemma as he needed to extract it himself. As William worked to cut the key out of his own flesh, the scalding steam continued, threatening Debbie's life. Debbie panicked as the steam grew hotter and began attacking William with a circular saw, escalating the situation into a deadly struggle. Her desperation and fear made her turn violent against the person trying to save her. Her time ran out during this confrontation, causing a metal rod to launch directly at her head and kill her instantly. Debbie's death showed how panic and desperation could turn survivable situations into fatal disasters. William Easton. William's final test placed his fate in the hands of Tara and Brent, the widow and son of Harold Abbott, whose insurance claim William had denied. Despite William's journey of redemption throughout his trials and his efforts to save others, his past decisions had created enemies who wanted revenge. Tara initially wanted revenge but couldn't follow through with killing William, showing mercy despite her anger. However, her teenage son Brent activated the trap, causing needles filled with hydrofluoric acid to pierce William's back. The acid slowly dissolved William's body from the inside out, melting his internal organs while he remained conscious. William's death was particularly tragic because he had genuinely changed and learned from his experience, but redemption couldn't erase the consequences of his past actions. Additional Saw VI victims. Several other insurance company employees died during William's trials, each facing traps designed to reflect their roles in denying coverage to desperate clients. These deaths represented the systematic nature of insurance industry cruelty and the widespread damage caused by corporate policies that prioritized profit over human life. The victims died because their jobs involved finding ways to deny help to people who needed it most. Each death served as a lesson about the human cost of corporate greed and the importance of valuing life over money. Their deaths prove that Jigsaw's justice extended beyond individual crimes to systemic failures in society. Brad, Ryan, and Dena. This love triangle trap took place in public for the first time, witnessed by a crowd in a shopping center storefront. Brad and Ryan were chained to opposite sides of a work table with power saws, while their mutual lover Dena was suspended above a third saw. The men had 60 seconds to push their saws into each other to save Dena. However, when Dena revealed her manipulative nature and inability to choose between the men, Brad and Ryan reached a mutual decision. Instead of killing each other, they allowed Dena to be bisected by the ascending saw blade. The crowd watched in horror as Dena was literally cut in half, marking Jigsaw's transition to public spectacle. Dena's death represented justice for her manipulation, while Brad and Ryan survived by recognizing the real problem. Nina was Bobby Dagan's publicist, who had helped perpetuate his lie about surviving a jigsaw trap. She found herself suspended in a chair with spikes positioned around her neck that would move faster toward her throat based on sound levels. Bobby had to extract a key from deep within Nina's stomach while maintaining complete silence. The 60-second timer and sound sensitivity mechanism made this nearly impossible to complete successfully. Any noise from either Bobby or Nina would accelerate the spikes toward her neck. Despite Bobby's desperate attempts to remain quiet while performing surgery, the time pressure and mechanism's sensitivity resulted in Nina's death as the spikes penetrated her throat. Nina's death punished her for enabling Bobby's fraud while testing his ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. Suzanne was Bobby's lawyer who had helped him profit from his fabricated survival story. She was strapped to a vertical table with 3 spikes aimed at her eyes and mouth, while Bobby had to hold up a heavy weight that simultaneously simultaneously pierced his sides during a 60-second countdown. The trap tested Bobby's physical endurance and pain tolerance as the weight grew heavier while stabbing into his flesh. Despite his desperate efforts to maintain the weight, Bobby's strength gave out just seconds before the timer expired. Suzanne was lifted directly into the spikes, creating an extremely bloody death sequence as they penetrated her face. Suzanne's death proved that Bobby's lies had consequences for everyone who helped him profit from his deception. Kale was Bobby's best friend, who had supported his fraudulent claims about surviving Jigsaw's traps.
Kale, I can see you, okay? Kale, don't move.
He faced a hanging trap while blindfolded, with Bobby needing to guide him across a series of planks to safety. The test required precise verbal instructions and complete trust between the two men within 60 seconds. Despite Bobby's decent guidance through the obstacle course, Kale failed to catch the key when Bobby tossed it to him at the final moment. The key fell to the floor below, leaving Kale stranded as the timer expired. He was lifted into the air by a noose around his neck, hanging to death while Bobby watched helplessly. Kale's death resulted from a simple mistake that had fatal consequences, proving that friendship couldn't overcome failed execution. Joyce Dan, Bobby's wife Joyce, faced the ultimate test as Bobby was required to recreate the exact trap he falsely claimed to survive. Joyce was chained inside a device resembling a brazen bull that would gradually incinerate her unless Bobby could complete his fabricated story for real. To save Joyce, Bobby had to drive 2 hooks through his pectoral muscles and hoist himself above the ceiling to deactivate the mechanism. Despite his desperate attempts, the hooks tore through Bobby's flesh and he fell to the floor, unable to complete the task. The timer expired and the brazen bull closed around Joyce, burning her alive while Bobby watched. Joyce died because of her husband's lies, representing the ultimate cost of fraud and deception in the Saw universe. Evan was a white supremacist who found himself glued to the driver's seat of a car positioned on jacks with only 30 seconds to pull a lever and prevent a catastrophic chain reaction. His girlfriend Kara was chained by the wheels, his friend Dan had his arms and jaw chained to the back seat, and Jake was pinned to the garage door. Despite Evan's desperate struggle against the powerful adhesive, tearing at his own skin in the process, he couldn't reach the lever in time. The jacks collapsed, causing the car to fall and crush Kara under the wheels, then lunge forward to tear Dan's arms and jaw from his body before crashing into Jake. Evan was thrown through the windshield when the car crashed. Evan's death completed a gruesome chain reaction that killed everyone in the garage, punishing them for their racist beliefs and violence. White supremacist gang. Hoffman targeted a group of white supremacists at an abandoned junkyard, though specific details about individual deaths are limited. This represented Hoffman's increasing deviation from John Kramer's rehabilitation philosophy toward pure vengeance killing against groups he personally despised. The gang members died in various mechanical traps designed more for torture than testing, showing how Hoffman had abandoned the possibility of redemption. Their deaths served Hoffman's personal vendetta rather than any larger philosophical purpose. Each death was brutal and offered no real chance for survival or learning. These deaths proved that Hoffman had become a serial killer, using Jigsaw's methods rather than following his rehabilitation goals. Jill Tuck. Detective Hoffman finally captured Jill and placed her in the original reverse bear trap that had once threatened Amanda Young. Unlike Amanda's version, Jill's trap had no key for escape, making it purely an execution device rather than a test of will and survival. The iconic bear trap mechanism activated and snapped open, tearing Jill's jaw apart in one of the franchise's most visceral death scenes. Her death was purely revenge rather than justice, representing Hoffman's complete abandonment of Jigsaw's testing methodology. Jill died knowing that Hoffman had perverted everything John Kramer stood for. Jill's death marked Hoffman's transformation from apprentice to corrupt serial killer, using Jigsaw's tools for personal vendettas. SWAT team and police officers. Hoffman killed numerous law enforcement officers during his infiltration of the police station and his various trap locations. A SWAT team was sealed in a room and killed by toxic gas, while multiple police officers died during Hoffman's rampage to reach Jill. These deaths represented wholesale slaughter rather than targeted testing, showing Hoffman's complete departure from Jigsaw's selective philosophy. The officers died because they were obstacles to Hoffman's revenge, rather than because they needed to learn life lessons. Their deaths served no purpose beyond clearing Hoffman's path. These murders proved that Hoffman had become everything Jigsaw opposed, a killer who destroyed life rather than trying to preserve or improve it. Additional Saw 3D victims. The film featured 27 total deaths, making it the bloodiest entry in the franchise, with elaborate traps designed more for 3D visual effects than philosophical testing. Many victims died in increasingly brutal ways that prioritized spectacle over the series' original themes of redemption and life appreciation. The elevated death count represented the franchise's transition from intimate psychological horror to mechanical torture spectacle. Each death was designed to showcase 3D technology rather than explore meaningful themes about life and death. The volume of deaths diluted their individual impact and meaning. These deaths showed how the franchise had evolved from John Kramer's focused philosophy to mass entertainment through violence. Mitch was lowered upside down into a funnel surrounded by burning hot coils powered by the same type of motorcycle he had sold with faulty brakes. The connection between his crime, selling a defective vehicle that led to John Kramer's nephew's death, and his punishment created thematic resonance with the franchise's justice system. Despite Anna's efforts to rescue him and Mitch being close to the brake handle that could save him, the spinning hot coils ultimately mutilated his body. He was turned into a mushy mess by the mechanical torture device, dying in agony from the heat and grinding machinery. Mitch's death represented a return to the franchise's themes of ironic justice connected to victims' past crimes. Anna and other barn victims. Anna and several other victims died within barn-based traps designed to test their connection to crimes that had affected John Kramer personally. The rural setting represented a return to the franchise's isolated atmosphere, reminiscent of earlier entries. These victims faced various mechanical death traps, though specific details about individual mechanisms are limited in available sources. Their deaths served to advance the plot while maintaining the franchise's tradition of elaborate mechanical torture devices. Each death contributed to the film's attempt to return to the series' original philosophy. The barn setting and victim selection showed Jigsaw's attempt to reconnect with his foundational principles of testing people connected to his personal losses. Logan and Halloran. The film's climax featured Logan Nelson and Detective Halloran in metal collars equipped with laser mechanisms during a confession sequence. Both men were forced to admit their crimes.
Have an opportunity to live. All you need to do is confess.
With the collar designed to activate based on their honesty and responses to the questioning. Halloran volunteered to confess first, but ultimately triggered Logan's collar through his responses, sending Logan back against the wall with the laser show on full force. Logan then revealed his role as the hospital resident who had mixed up John Kramer's medical files, providing crucial backstory. The laser collar delivered swift but brutal justice. Their deaths connected to the franchise's origins, while revealing new information about John Kramer's early experiences with medical malpractice. Additional Jigsaw victims. The film featured 16 total deaths as it attempted to return the franchise to its psychological horror roots while revealing previously unknown aspects of John Kramer's history and methodology. These deaths were designed to feel more connected to the original film's philosophy while introducing new characters and situations. The elevated death count maintained audience expectations while trying to recapture the series' original themes. Each death served to advance the plot while providing the mechanical violence audiences expect. The victims died as part of games that felt more authentic to John Kramer's original vision compared to Hoffman's purely vengeful approach. Captain Angie Garza. Captain Garza faced a trap involving hot wax as part of the film's focus on police corruption within Detective Zeke Banks' department. Her death represented the consequences of institutional corruption and the systematic nature of police misconduct that the film explored. The wax trap's specific mechanism and circumstances are limited in available sources, but her death served to advance the theme of corrupt officers facing justice. Her position as captain made her death particularly significant for the department's power structure. The trap was designed to reflect her role in enabling or participating in corruption. Garza's death proved that rank and authority couldn't protect corrupt officials from facing consequences for their actions. Additional spiral victims. The film featured 8 confirmed deaths targeting corrupt police officers, though detailed information about specific individuals and trap mechanisms is limited. Each death was designed to expose different aspects of police corruption, while maintaining the franchise's tradition of ironic justice. The victims died because of their participation in corrupt practices that harmed innocent people and perverted justice. Their deaths served Detective Banks' investigation while providing commentary on real-world police corruption issues. Each trap reflected the specific ways individual officers had betrayed their duty. These deaths represented the franchise's evolution to address contemporary social issues while maintaining its core themes of justice and consequences. Valentina. Valentina faced a trap connected to bone marrow extraction, reflecting the film's medical tourism theme and her involvement in the scam that targeted John Kramer during his cancer treatment. The ironic connection between her participation in fake treatments and her punishment through a medical procedure maintained the franchise's tradition of thematic justice. Her death served John Kramer's revenge against the medical tourism operation that had exploited his desperation for cancer treatment. The trap's medical nature reflected both her crime and Kramer's own medical suffering. Her death represented justice for exploiting terminally ill patients' hopes. Valentina's punishment proved that exploiting the dying would result in experiencing medical torture in return. Matteo, Gabriella, and Parker Sears. These 3 victims died as part of John Kramer's systematic revenge against everyone involved in the medical tourism scam. Their deaths represented comprehensive justice against the entire operation that had taken advantage of desperate cancer patients seeking treatment. Each death was designed to reflect their specific roles in the fraudulent medical scheme while maintaining the franchise's themes of ironic punishment. Their deaths served to complete John's revenge while providing the mechanical violence audiences expect. The group execution showed the scope of the medical tourism conspiracy. Their deaths proved that participating in scams targeting the terminally ill would result in facing the same desperation and pain. Unconfirmed deaths. Cecilia Pedersen, Henry Kessler, and Mark Hoffman's deaths remain unconfirmed in Saw X, suggesting potential survival or ambiguous endings that maintain the franchise's tradition of surprise revelations and potential future appearances. These ambiguous fates preserve possibilities for future films, while providing some characters with uncertain conclusions. The lack of confirmation maintains suspense about their ultimate survival or death. Their unclear status reflects the franchise's tendency to bring back supposedly dead characters. If you enjoyed this and want to see every deserved death in the Saw movies, click the video on the screen.